we have not one but two outstanding people here to talk to you about the water that is unseen, groundwater. And I guess we'll get started so we have time to hear them. Is there anything I'm forgetting? I had a lot of things on my list today. Anything from any members? All right, I'm going to introduce our member, Roberta Dow, who's a retired MSU educator, and she's a local advocate for groundwater. She's going to demonstrate a groundwater model so we can, it's sometimes hard to picture what happens beneath, what we can't see. So this is a way to get an in the ground look at what happens with groundwater and why some of us around the League of Women Voters have been so concerned about things such as what happens with people's septic on their property and where it ends up, or other chemicals that we've introduced into our environment. So here's Roberta. She's mic'd up.
I hope that I'm mic'd up enough. Can you hear me? Okay, because I need to use my hands, and so I've got to be light. What I'm going to try to demonstrate here for you is the interaction between surface and groundwater and the water. Louder? You want to give it a little bit more boost so they can hear back there? I have this jerry-rigged system here, so I can't get it too close. Okay, now. Can you hear now? It's still louder, they're saying in the back. So this is a groundwater simulator, and this simulator...
Is that better?
Yeah. This simulator, you could also call it a flow model. And in this simulator, you have the precipitation coming in here on this side of the model, and then it's percolating down into the ground. And down here is the bedrock, and this happens to be fractured bedrock here that you can see. And then above the bedrock, there's a layer of gravel, and then a clay layer. This is a clay layer, which is finer, and water doesn't move through it as rapidly. And then above that, there's sands and gravels and so forth, and then all the way up to the surface. Also in this model is I have a deep bedrock well, a well that's a deep sandpoint well, and then some shallow wells. Likewise over here. And then the farthest, these wells are artesian wells, and those are just wells that are under pressure. And so they're bringing the water up to the surface. So with this, with the water coming in, might help if I have it set up in the right spot. With the water coming in on this side, and it'll take care of a minute to get it back running. We played around so much with the system here that I guess we didn't get it all right. So in this, we also have a septic system, septic tank with a drain field. We have a underground fuel storage tank, and I'm going to, as soon as we get enough water coming in here, we have somebody's water glass. That's empty. Okay, here, I'll take it. Sorry about that. Okay, so the rain is going to be coming in here, rain or snow or sleet, into the flow model, and soon we'll have some moisture percolating into the system. And meanwhile, I'm going to demonstrate with some food coloring dyes some of the impacts of what we do on the surface, that how it can impact our groundwater. But while the water is coming into the system here in a moment, take into consideration that water comes in, it percolates down, it flows through the system, And ultimately, water comes back to the surface. And all of you have experienced that groundwater coming to the surface when you've been walking in a lake and you've been walking along and all of a sudden there's a real cold spot, and that's a spring where the groundwater is coming back to the surface. So there's this union between groundwater and surface water, and Liz will make more of that in a bit. So in this system, I'm going to put some red food coloring into the septic tank, and if this is a good functioning, pumped, regularly monitored septic system, then it would be doing the job of taking the organisms and the nutrients that are coming into the system, and it would be making it such that it would be provided properly. But this system's not working quite right, and so consequently it's backed up a little bit, and because it's backed up, it's already gone into the lake, and you can see a little bit of color change in the lake. And now you can see that we're getting the drain field getting, you can't see it very well out there. Okay, so you can see that the wastewater is coming out into the septic system drain field here, and then some is moving to the surface, and then here you have a lake, and then over here is a stream that's leading out into, let's say, Lake Michigan. And so consequently, keep an eye on that. Meanwhile, I'm going to fill a leaking underground fuel storage tank like I had on my farm, and this one's leaking, and so gasoline is moving down through the profile, and you can keep an eye on that. And then this is a homeowner who lives by a lake, and he happens to have a lawn that runs right down to the lake, and yet he decides that he wants to fertilize all the way to the lake, and consequently you can see the nutrients, especially nitrogen and phosphorus, if he's using a phosphorus fertilizer, which he shouldn't be, moving down into the lake, and thus making for a lot of vegetative growth in the lake. The other thing that can be a risk to groundwater and ultimately surface water is an abandoned well. And we have more abandoned wells here in Michigan than anywhere else in the United States. And these abandoned wells then serve as a direct pipeline down to the groundwater, and consequently there's no remediation taking place up where the oxygen is available to remediate, and so it goes right down into the groundwater, and then you can also have some backup and into the surface water. Here's a plume that's starting here, here's a plume, and I'm going to back it off just a little bit. And consequently, the development of these plumes can go for short distance. If it's a flashy spring, a flashy creek where the spring is feeding into it right quickly, well then you can have contamination reach there very rapidly in days. But you can also have long-term movement of these chemicals that can move through the groundwater and come back to the surface miles and miles away with the plumes that develop and flow for miles with the groundwater flow. And for instance, up in Mansalona, there's the one that's moving towards Shandy Creek and so forth. But these plumes then can take days, weeks, years, or centuries to come back up and contaminate our surface water. Meanwhile, anybody that's drilling into the groundwater, into the area where the plumes are, can end up with contamination. So with that, I'm going to quickly get out of the way so that you can keep on watching the plumes flow, and then Liz can speak to you. Any questions?
I'm just wondering what constitutes an abandoned well, because we had 2 wells go dry on our property,
Okay.
and they're capped.
Okay, an abandoned well is a casing that has not been filled, so that it's a empty casing, even if it's got a cover on the top, that's an abandoned well if it's not in use. And if it's not in use, the old metal of those casings deteriorates more rapidly than a used well. And consequently, you want to have those properly abandoned, and depending on the type of well, whether you use cement or bentonite, that's used to fill them.
Thank you.
Yes?
In Leelanau County, where do you go to get your well water checked? How do you do it?
You can take a sample of your well water. In other words, run your faucet for a period of time, so that it's not just pipe water in your house, but that you're actually getting groundwater. And it'll be a colder temperature water, so you can tell when you're getting it. And then take it to one of the local water testing labs, or you can take it to the health department and they can send it in. But in all cases, there's a cost. But you then have to ask for what type of testing you want. And generally, you want to have a coliform bacteria and a nitrite test done. Those are the most common types of testing that you have done. But if you suspect pesticides, then, and a particular pesticide, then you can have that tested as well. But there's SOS, there's a whole bunch of them in Traverse, and also the health department, and Lake Ann, and so on. Okay? Thank you.
You switch yours off? Okay.
Thanks, Roberta. So some of you, we didn't have a November meeting because we were at the, many of us were at the Michigan Septic Summit, which we helped to sponsor along with Flow, and the Grand Traverse League, and a number of other organizations. And one of the really powerful things that came out of that for me was the scientists that we had from the USDA, who talked about how far viruses, for example, can travel through groundwater and how long they persist. Miles and miles and miles away from the source. And for up to 2 years, they were still detecting viable viral material from the contaminated groundwater from septics. So these are really important things that we don't think about or get to visualize very clearly very often. So thank you again, Roberta, for demonstrating this, and please feel free to come up after today if you're able to stay and have a closer look at the model. And I'm excited to introduce our next speaker, Liz Kirkwood, the Executive Director of Flow, and she was our 2018 Outstanding Community Member Award winner from the League. So I'm excited to introduce our next speaker, Liz Kirkwood, the Executive Director of Flow, and she was our 2018 Outstanding Community Member Award winner from the League. So happy to have you back to actually speak to us this time. And I'm looking forward to hearing what you have to share about Michigan, or the 6th Great Lake, Michigan's groundwater. Thanks, Liz.
Well, good afternoon, and thank you for this wonderful invitation. I am very grateful to the League. This is really one of my favorite League of Women Voters groups. I guess I'm not allowed to say that, but I am going to say that. The passion and commitment to water protection is really extraordinary, and it's extra special today to be here with so many local officials, sheriff, and all of the people in government who are so dedicated to making sure that public health, safety, and our environment are really prioritized. And so I just want to express gratitude to all of you for your service and hard work on a daily basis. So this is work that we've been involved with for a while now. Dave Dempsey on our staff is our senior advisor and authored this report called the 6th Great Lake. And what that refers to is this visual image of how much groundwater is in the Great Lakes Basin. It's as large as the equivalent, a 6th lake that would be the size of Lake Huron. And for me, I will tell you, as a non-scientist, as a lawyer, also thanks to Roberta for showing us visually, right? Where so many of us are visual learners, we need to understand, what does it mean? This is that invisible water source that's so vital to our existence. And I spent a little bit of time, and I wanted to look at all the water supplies just in Leelanau County. And not surprisingly, most of the drinking water in this county comes from groundwater. There were only two systems. There was the Northport Cottage Owners that takes water from the surface water, and Elmwood Township from surface water. Everything else is from groundwater, which I think underscores why it's so important for us to really start connecting the dots to understand what happens when you put fertilizer on your lawn, what happens when you've got that leaky underground storage tank, what happens when there's a well, how does that movement happen in the water cycle that we all learned about when we were in 5th grade, but out of sight, out of mind, we forget. Tricia was mentioning, and thank you all for supporting the Michigan Septic Summit that we held on November 6th. What an incredible turnout. We had local health officials from all over the state. We had county commissioners and township supervisors and all sorts of passionate citizens and scientists who really care about this issue. Because, as you know, Michigan is the only state without a uniform septic code that demands regular inspections and maintenance. And what I can tell you is there is energy and passion right now, doesn't matter what side of the aisle you're walking down, to fix this problem, because we are the Great Lakes state. But I'm getting ahead of myself. I will just say a couple words about Flow, because I know many of you know about us as an organization for love of water. That is our mission, and we come at water issues from a unique perspective and passion for protecting water as a public and shared resource. That means we are vigorously focused on preventing water privatization, and first got into this work. As you know, our founder, Jim Olson, was the legal representative representing the citizens group, Michigan Citizens for Water Conservation Against Nestle. And yesterday you may have heard that there was a victory in the Court of Appeals where the Osceola Township's zoning denial of the pumping station was upheld, and that was because the appellate judges found that bottled water is not an essential service and it doesn't constitute a public water supply. So, we think that is a fantastic victory, and of course it's very likely that will be appealed to the Supreme Court of Michigan, but it is it was very interesting just looking at the legal analysis, and what the judges did was read and provide a statutory interpretation. Just like Supreme Court Justice Scalia is always talking about the plain meaning, and that's what they did. They said, well, what is a public water supply? What is an essential service? And it was clear that Nestle's application didn't satisfy those definitions. We as an organization, we're involved in a lot of work. One of our key efforts this year is we're working with a consortium of other nonprofits from all over the state to look at how do we fund Michigan's water infrastructure crisis. So in addition to addressing septic issues in more rural areas, we're very, very focused on figuring out how do we make sure that Michigan can find adequate funds. It's basically $1 billion a year to help rebuild our storm, our drinking, and sewer systems throughout the state. It's a huge state, and we have crumbling, aging infrastructure. We've gotten a D rating, not so good, from the American Society of Engineers. And so that's all part of our work, and lots more. This is a video that I am probably not going to share with you right now, but I can send this out and have Tricia share with you. And it's a great video that we put together called I Am Invisible. And Anne Marie Ullman is the narrator, and Glenn Wolfe is the illustrator, and it's from the perspective of groundwater. And here's the beautiful artwork that Glenn put together. That is, it's just wonderful. It really shows kind of the whole cycle of our system. So I'm going to move through pretty quickly, and again, really appreciate having the scientific background. I don't have to talk about how groundwater moves so much, and I want to share though with you this. I read this wonderful article a couple years ago about the water wars out in Arizona. And I can share that actually with you guys too. But I love this image, and this is more apropos for aquifers out west, but the author says that it's to imagine what groundwater is like. It's a waterlogged earth moving and twisting through strata of dry rock, like a wet article of clothing in the laundry bin. And I think, again, it's just that trying to understand what we're what we're focused on. I think a lot of people have this idea that groundwater is just a big pool that if you put your well in, that would just kind of suck it up, and it doesn't work exactly like that. So we're going to talk about groundwater contamination, and I'm going to, of course, give a special emphasis on the septic system and PFAS, and then end with policy recommendations, and then, of course, conversation with all of you. So, why does groundwater matter? It is part of our water cycle. It's just hugely important in terms of our basic essential daily need for water. 45% of Michiganders receive their water from groundwater, and as we illustrated here in this county alone, majority of the citizens do. We have more private wells than any other state, which is really kind of extraordinary to think about. The other thing that I don't think a lot of people realized is that 42% of the waters in the Great Lakes originate from groundwater. And that's just pretty amazing to think about when you think about the vastness of the region and how big this area is. But I don't think I need to convince you why groundwater matters. I think we all kind of get that. But there are lots of pathways for contamination, and the report that we have copies of this for you, both electronically but physical copies here. And but this report that we put together last year focused on septic, nitrates, and then legacy contamination. We are going to be focusing and developing another report on groundwater that will be examining chlorides and also deep injection wells and other important topics like that. So we've already talked about how we don't have this regular system for septic inspection and maintenance. So as you know, we've got 44 local health departments that help with the design and the installation of septic. But once that septic system is put in, at your grandmother's cottage, there are no requirements for maintenance or inspection. And one of the stunning statistics that stuck out with me at our septic summit was that in Midland County, the public sector service consultant said that some 30% of homeowners did not know that they had septic systems. And so we obviously have some great challenges. The legacy of contamination is very significant in Michigan. We've got over 3,000 sites that we call sacrifice sites, where there are deed restrictions and covenants that forbid the use of groundwater. That's a lot of places to just say it's off limits. And then in addition to that, we've got another 6,000 orphan contamination sites. And this is part of the legacy of getting rid of our polluter pay law, because now we don't have responsible parties to clean it up. And as we move forward, it's critical for us as a state to demand that when you make a mess, you got to clean it up, right? This is an image of those sacrifice zones, and they're just all over the state. The one up in the UP, for example, is 16 square miles, and that's a former mining site. And this image is from Bridge Magazine. It's a legacy that we really got to reckon with. And what are the economic impacts? It's very significant, right? Just over the last 24 years, taxpayers have been burdened with over $1 billion in remediation costs. If homeowners were left to come on in.
That's okay.
Okay. If homeowners actually had to pay for filters and get new wells because of the nitrate contamination, we're looking at a bill of over $2 billion. And then we have a lot of unknown costs. We don't know how much all of the sacrifice zones and also the PFAS contaminated sites. These are going to be big ticket items. There's our septic summit. Thank you for all coming. And this was the Dr. Mark Borchardt, who Tricia mentioned, and he really gave a stunning presentation. And what I loved about his presentation, he said, as a scientist, I never thought it would be controversial to talk about human and animal waste, but it is. And he, what he basically said is the more septic systems that are in a watershed, the more human enteric bacteria you're going to find. And of course, that has been amply studied and documented by another scientist, Dr. Joan Rose from MSU, who did a incredibly important study. I think it was 2015 or 2016, but basically 84% of the rivers in northern Michigan have E. coli in them. And for a state that prides itself on all these cold stream trout rivers, that doesn't sound too good. Many of you probably participated in this study with the Department of Human Health Services, and Beckett and Rader. Claire Carner came and gave a presentation. I think I was here. It was a couple years ago. And they put together a wonderful site called Managing, I will share that link with you too, but Managing Health in Climate Change. And what they did is they identified the different counties that had point of sale or point of transfer ordinances that would trigger septic inspections and maintenance. And we currently have, what you can see, it's a patchwork, right? And it's, we have 11 counties, I think, that have actual septic ordinances. And then we have, although Berry and Eden, I think, are trying to repeal it. And then, of course, we know here in our area, Kalkaska, just a couple months ago, was involved in that. And I think we should ask ourselves, what's behind that? Why is there that resistance? We had representatives from the real estate community and at our septic summit, and I think we heard both points of view about how adding septic approval could delay the sale and transfer of real estate properties. But I think we also heard that it's not really a big deal. It's part of the whole process. And when you think about a home and you think about the entire system, I think it really makes sense to make sure that your septic system is working properly. It's really the responsible thing to do. But one thing I think we heard a lot from that conference is that the septic problem is much more extensive than just the properties that are being sold, and that there's a need for equity to make sure that everybody's system is working properly. And so coming out of this septic summit, it's our intent now, and I think there's a resounding support for building a really broad coalition. How do we make sure that the local health departments who have, some of the departments have pretty strict regulations to protect health. How do we make sure that we respect local ordinances, but also at least create a minimum at the state level for inspection and maintenance? Feeling out that tension between local and state control. And also, how do we work together with the realtors, with the home builders? Because the issue of septic maintenance and inspections is applicable to everybody who owns a septic system. So how do we capture everybody in that? And then the other piece that we heard a lot about was funding. How do we make sure that in places where there is a lot of poverty, how do we make sure that there's support and assistance for those members in our communities who struggle and who need that additional support? So those will be a lot of the elements that this coalition will be working on, and I'm going to be making a presentation to the local health administrators in a couple of weeks, and we would really love to have folks from Leelanau to be part of this coalition. So PFAS. This is Michigan's next public health crisis. And I think, post-Flint, the thing that the state of Michigan did get right was to respond quickly, putting together this task force called MPART that now Governor Whitmer has instituted as part of the environmental agency EGLE. When I think about toxic chemicals, you think immediately about Rachel Carson, 1962, and she really told the world all about this class of chemicals from the chlorine family. Well, this is a whole class of chemicals in the fluorine family. And unfortunately, we didn't kind of use her logic to think about the long-term implications of chemical use. And these chemicals, carbon and fluorine, they're an incredible group of chemicals. They have these remarkable properties for weatherproofing. So it's in almost every name brand thing you can imagine, from Scotchgard to Gore-Tex to firefighting foam, the AAA foam. It's in our carpets and it's in a lot of our outdoor apparel. And it's been tremendously useful is the point that I'm trying to make. And but the problem is that it really is one of those kind of forever chemicals, because it has these persistent organic qualities to them that makes it very difficult for it to biodegrade. And you think about other chemicals, PCBs, for example. PCBs attach to the fatty part in fish, and so it bioaccumulates. PFAS chemicals, so it's the per and polyalkyl fluorine chemicals, and there are like 5,000 in this class. It's a huge, wild variation of them. They attach not just to the fats, but all throughout the body. So it's not, it could be argued that it's even, more dangerous, because it doesn't have, you can't just go in and get rid of the fat and kind of get rid of that toxicity. But we haven't regulated this at the state level nor the federal level. But of course there is acute concern across the country, and in states like New Hampshire and New Jersey, New York, and other sites, of course West Virginia, where these chemicals were produced by DuPont and 3M. We are seeing these clusters of terrible health impacts, related cancers, and we're seeing leadership from lots of the states to put in chemical levels that are protective of human health. So I just wanted to share this image with you from the National Wildlife Federation. They put together a nice report on both scientific and policy recommendations on PFAS. But again, in the context of groundwater and the whole cycle, it's important for us to remember there are lots of pathways that PFAS can travel through air, water, and land. And one of the big concerns is land application of a lot of the wastewater treatments plants. They are not getting rid of the PFAS. They don't have carbon filters because it wasn't on our radar. And a lot of that waste is then being applied on farms, and then plants are growing, and then we're ingesting it. So there are lots of pathways that we've got to, first of all, identify, and then we've got to, stop the manufacturing of these chemicals, and then we have to regulate these chemicals, and we've got to clean them up, and this is just not an easy task. It is ubiquitous. I mean, these chemicals are found on the poles of the planet. It's challenging. This is MPART. This is the response team that I mentioned before, and testing over 1,700 public water supplies. And this is a picture of folks in Parchment, Michigan, because it was there. PFAS was found in their drinking water. The original studies actually were found up in Grayling by one of the DEQ scientists back in 2012, and we did not heed his warning. But there are sites all over the state, all around the Wolverine shoe factory as well. These are the proposed maximum contaminant levels for these, and these are only 7 different compounds and variations of PFAS chemicals. And as I mentioned, there are over, close to 5,000 of them. So the question is, how do you, again, make sure that you're covering this range and this class of chemicals? And does it make sense to just focus on these specific 7? And then, of course, the question is, are these levels protective of human health and the environment? And right now, we are in the process of rulemaking, and the public comment period will continue into next year. Now, the hope is that the rulemaking will be finalized by April of 2020. The challenge is, though, we now have an Environmental Rules and Reviewing Committee, the ERRC. And this was a new committee established under Governor Snyder, and there are a number of industry representatives on that committee. And there has initially, last month, there was some resistance from a couple of those industry members to adopting these proposed levels based on pretty extensive health-based reports. So stay tuned, and we will see. But I think for public health purposes, it's really critical for Michigan to adopt protective standards as fast as possible. We need to be leaders on this. And remember, in the past, Michigan has been a leader. We were one of the first states to ban PCBs, and we're hoping that, it's going to be 2020, and this is going to be a time for us really to be forward-thinking and to take this very seriously. So, couple of just policy recommendations, and I'd love to hear your thoughts. But I think, first and foremost, for our state agencies, all of them, and for all of our citizens, we need to have that very clear scientific and legal perspective and understanding that our water cycle is one. The surface waters and the groundwaters are hydrologically connected, and they needed to be protected as a full healed cycle. Number 2, we need to identify long-term funding for these areas of contamination. And I guess the flip side of the coin is we have to make sure that we don't expand that list. Let's keep that list, let's clean it up. Third, let's cease sacrifice zones. If we have a mess, let's clean it up. Let's not put these kind of restrictions that lead to no use of our groundwaters. Fourth, find more funding to test residential drinking water wells. One potential source of funding is from the USDA. They do have funding sources to help with this type of needed work. 5, state sanitary code. I think this is something that we can do together next year. We're always looking for the things where we can move everybody. 6, protect rural homeowners from nitrate contamination. 7, improve groundwater data collection and reporting. This is something that a lot of the states in the Great Lakes Basin are getting better at. We've got more and more technology that's helping us really understand. And the better the science, the better informed decisions we can make. And 8, it just goes back to education. The more we know, the better we'll protect and be the true stewards that we need to be with 20% of the world's fresh surface water right here. So that is what I have, and I'd love to have questions. Thanks.
I wonder, what's the situation in Canada, since we share Great Lakes with them? Are they aware and active, proactive on this? Do you know?
Well, yes, I think there is keen desire and focus on groundwater protection also in Canada. I am serving on the International Joint Commission's Water Quality Board, and there are 6 commissioners, 3 Canadian, 3 US, and this is the body that was established in 1909 as part of the Boundary Waters Treaty to help both of the governments manage our waters. And so we have 6 new commissioners, and in October up in Ottawa, one of the commissioners actually said that groundwater was his #1 priority. So that's what I know now, but if there are more specific things, we can talk about that too. Yeah, Brett?
Yeah, so we have some clear.
So everybody else can hear the question too.
Thanks, Tricia.
Thank you. Thanks, Liz. And yeah, we have some clear concerns over the contaminants like PFAS, the things that have direct implications.
Who's
on
we, Brad?
we, everybody, I think, I would hope, but that have direct implications on human health. But as we know as well, there are contaminants of emerging concern like pharmaceuticals that can have ecological effects on fish, wildlife, invertebrates, and so on, the likes of which we don't even know what the ramifications are, partly because of lack of information, partly because of the lack of willingness from the corporations, right, that produce them. And so just, I guess, to bring to light and remind folks that, you know, septic systems are conduits for those pharmaceuticals that you know, we rely on, and that just to remember and think of that. And lastly, are you or is Flo considering digging into that as more information comes to light, or any kind of plan of action or attack on that issue?
Thank you, Brett, for that great question. Pharmaceuticals are definitely part of this complex cycle that threatens our waterways. One of the efforts that we would like to secure help on in this region is working with Munson Medical Hospital. There is just so much that the hospital can do with respect to pharmaceuticals in terms of creating programs so that people can dispose of their pharmaceuticals in a responsible way. And it could be kind of tie-barred with the opiate crisis. And so there is a lot of potential for both education, but also working with key players and influencers to help with that problem. But as a board member, Brett, you can help us move this too.
We have the sheriff in the audience, and in last week's paper, maybe many of you saw that they were able to celebrate their 1 millionth pill collected through our Leelanau County safe drop box for pharmaceutical collection. So, you know, this is supposed to be a celebratory event, and we're trying to, you know, thank you all, but this can be some really heavy stuff. But the point is that if we each do whatever we can do about it, we can make a feast possible, right? We can do these things if we work together on them. So that's the thing that I hope, you know, like I said, again, a lot of heavy stuff, very complex issues, but there's pieces that each of us can take on and be a part of, like going back to my introduction, create the kind of communities that we want to live in for ourselves, for our children, for our grandchildren. So are there, I know I gotta get people out of here too. Are there any more questions for Liz? Okay.
It's for the sheriff. When you get those pills, what do you do with them?
That's a great question. We split up now. So we started that program in March of, this is probably loud enough. We started the program in March of 2013. We bolted a box to the floor and the wall in the corner. We have a camera right above it. We take in the pills voluntarily. It's anything but liquids. In the cases of hospice, you know, there's a lot of narcotics, a lot of opiates that come in to people's lives, and nobody wants to use drugs. So where do they go? They get flushed down a toilet, end up in groundwater, or they go in a dumpster. And you have people looking in your dumpsters at night, believe it or not. They're not always looking for scrap metal and aluminum. They're not looking for TV. They're looking to find oxycodone, Xanax, Oxycontin. They're looking to find anything you dispose of, and they have different ways of mixing it. So your question, best answered, the DEA has a program where we box it up, and if you read last week's Enterprise, you'll see that picture where the Under Sheriff from Morgan and I are posing with this month's take. So there's boxes about this big, if you will, square-wise, and they'll fill up, they weigh about 40 pounds. We take those into DEA, they're lined with plastic. We take them into DEA and they're incinerated, and they incinerate in a process so they control where the contaminants are going. But it also protects you from B&Es in your homes. It also protects your kids in your community. And a lot of them are going wrong with drugs. You know, they start out with alcohol, marijuana, whatever, and it's just one next thing, next thing you know, they're on heroin. We've had a lot of issues with heroin, and now that's turning into crystal meth. Now that there's more pressure on heroin. So it's very important what you're saying. It's very important that we tackle it, but when they're properly incinerated, then you don't have the concerns.
When you throw them in your dumpster, they go in the landfill. And we saw what happens when you put stuff in the landfill. It ends up in the groundwater too, or on our crops, or, you know, so it's all connected. We got one back there.
Hi, thank you very much. This is very important work. And I wonder if, in going about it, we can remember that the municipal jurisdictions, the planning commissions, the councils, the commissioners, all need to be reminded of the importance of protecting shoreline areas and coastal wetlands and you know, limbic wetlands from overdevelopment.
Wetlands are our natural filters.
Thank you. That is a really important point too. You know, Michigan, say 300-400 years ago, we had about 10 million acres of coastal wetlands, and we now have about 5. And it's understandable why a lot of people think, oh, it's just swamp. I mean, you think about our nation's capital, you think about Lansing, right? These were built on swamps. And but now, again, we understand the science. We understand there's economic value. They are literally are sponges. Wetlands are they're building coastal resistance as our waters are rising. They have very important economic benefits. And while I'm reluctant to put a price on it because I really don't like that, we unfortunately talk about money a lot. And so we have to put it in that economic framework where people can say, oh, you mean, oh, if we keep those wetlands, we don't have to build a barrier, you know. And it's the same thing about, you know, our new thinking about stormwater, and you know, instead of just building pipes as engineers, we should also think about green infrastructure. And in Sutton's Bay, we've got some great examples of rain gardens and other green infrastructure projects where we're increasing areas that used to just be paved parking lots. So we're at a very important point in time. It's fundamental how we kind of reimagine how we live, and what we can do as climate change is here. And it's, in Michigan, for example, we receive about 33 to 34 inches of water a year in rain, snow, and the like, and everything in between, as you know. But this year we've gotten about 10% more moisture, and this is going to be the new normal, whatever that means. So those wetlands, as you point out, are just absolutely crucial. So balancing development is going to be one of the greatest challenges in this region, as population will absolutely grow in the next 30 years.
Oh, one more in the back.
I want to follow up on the sheriff's comments about the drop box. Thank you very much. Munson Healthcare System has drop boxes in all of their facilities as well. They're part of their harm reduction program. They are taking in drugs as well, and I'm sure Flo's working with them. So if you're on that side of the county and you can't make it up here, there are other places you can take your drugs to. So thank you.
Well, thank you everyone for coming. Yes, everything on your table, your plate, your silverware, your cups, your napkins, your food is all compostable. We have Bay Area Recycling for Charities that supplied us with our dinnerware and are going to collect and take care of the things that we are done using. So please deposit everything you have in either of these two green bins at the end of the room. Oh, we have vote for books. Don't forget to vote. We will post the results in the next voter. And like Liz mentioned, there are a wide variety of informational pamphlets available from Flo on the table on your way out. If you haven't renewed your membership yet, I have membership applications too. Or if you have a friend that's interested in joining, we also have some really handy new cards that are real easy to share with a friend or a neighbor who might want more information about the league. They can find out more about us and how to become a member with the link to our new website. So I think that's it. Thank you all for coming and have a wonderful holiday season. See you all in January 8th, right here.